Video games. We all know and love them. They give us obstacles and challenges, entertainment and joy, benefits and rewards. And for some, it gives us a sense of identity. For instance, some identify with the characters and stories that they play. This is great and all, but not everyone can easily identify with the games that they play. Rather that be because the characters are racially different from them, or because they're a different gender, or because there's a lack of queer representation. LGBTQ is a form of identity and expression, and like other forms of identity and expression, representation in the media is important. Speaking from personal experience, having queer representation in pop culture allows me to feel seen, acknowledged, and valid. And since many gamers have a sense of identity through the games they play, representation in video games is also important, especially for queer individuals. As a matter of fact, many gamers are actually queer. According to the GLAAD organization, or Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, about 17% of gamers identify as being part of the LGBTQ community, roughly 1 in 5 gamers. And with the community expanding and the gaming industry expanding, representation is key. Now, I know what you might be thinking, that queer representation in games is a relatively new development that started in the 21st century. Well, actually, its history goes further back. It actually started its journey in the 20th century. One of the first instances of queer representation in video games actually came from, believe it or not, Super Mario. The Nintendo game Super Mario Bros. 2 was released in 1988 and featured a character named Birdo in the English user manual. According to Nicole Kilzer in her journal article, Queer Representation and Visibility in Video Games, Birdo is a pink dinosaur described as being a male who thinks he is a girl, implying that they're trans. However, as Kilzer mentions, this description is problematic because it suggests that transgender women are not actually women, but just delusional men. So even though Nintendo included a trans character, it was more offensive and harmful than anything else. And since its release, Nintendo has erased any mentions of Birdo being trans and has left their gender identity up for debate after receiving multiple criticisms. Birdo in Super Mario was more or less a bad example of queer representation in video games, and video games have had a bad history with it overall. For starters, the gaming industry just in general is a very masculine industry and often portrays heteronormative tropes and characters. As such, queer inclusion hasn't grown too much. In addition, as mentioned by Laura Cadwell in her article, LGBTQIA+ representation in the gaming industry, a lot of games that do have queer characters portray them as being villains, mentally challenged, or diseased. Or if the games have queer characters, they're unplayable and or have little to no importance. These characters are often killed, face tragedies, are hypersexualized, and stereotyped. On the other hand, some major gaming industries don't want to include queer characters because they believe doing so would be making a political statement. Or, as mentioned by Cadwell, some companies are hesitant to include queer representation out of fear of losing their predominant market of straight customers and damaging their brand integrity. So instead, they exclude such inclusion and continue on with their safe, heteronormative structures. Now, that doesn't mean there hasn't been any improvements since Birdo from 1988. There have been improvements lately within the 21st century. For example, the Maxis franchise, The Sims. The Sims is a life simulator game where players can create Sims and act out life experiences with those Sims. For instance, gamers can have their Sims work, fall in love, marry, and have families. What makes The Sims a good example of queer inclusion is because players can have their Sims be in queer relationships. In addition, as mentioned by Kelzer, With later installments of the game, such as The Sims 4, players have the option to make their characters trans or intersex, choose their pronouns, and their Sims are not limited to gendered clothing and/or makeup specific to gender identities. All in all, the Sims franchise is a virtual world full of real-life queer opportunities without all the oppression, discrimination, and inequality that exists in the real world. Another good example of queer inclusion in video games is the Don't Nod's Life is Strange franchise. As Kelzer describes, Life is Strange is about a teenage girl named Max who discovers she has the ability to rewind time shortly after returning to her hometown, Arcadia Bay. Throughout the game, she uses her newfound powers to save her childhood friend Chloe's life, which eventually leads to more and more strange natural occurrences. In another installment, Before the Storm, the game focuses on Chloe and her experiences leading up to Max's return to Arcadia Bay. In this franchise, Chloe is a queer character. In Before the Storm, she has a crush on a girl named Rachel, and the two eventually develop a relationship. Then, in Life is Strange, there's references to Chloe's relationship with Rachel. In addition, throughout Life is Strange, Max and Chloe steadily develop a deeper relationship with each other. So in this franchise, the queer characters are playable and supportive to the development of the game's story. So overall, there has been improvement since Nintendo's Birdo character. Even so, there's still room for improvement, and that simply means spreading out and treating queer characters like any other character in a video game, and giving them opportunities to be playable and giving them important roles. Me personally, I'm not a big gamer, but I do know firsthand how important representation is. It allows me to feel seen, acknowledged, and valid. And I want the next queer gamer to feel valid when they're playing video games. No, that doesn't mean that it needs to be all up in your face, but it shouldn't just be pushed aside and disregarded either. It should be treated like any other normal concept. In my opinion, the main thing that's getting in the way of accurate and good representation is politics. Like many other things in our lives nowadays, queerness has been politicalized. And in video games, some major industries don't want to make any sort of political statement by simply including queer characters in their games. And to me, that's sad. Queer people, just like everyone else, are just people who want to live their lives without having to worry about being hated and discriminated simply because they are different from everyone else. And as mentioned by Kilzer, queer people aren't inherently political, but we've been made political from hate and discrimination and from the LGBTQ community's history of activism to combat all that hate and discrimination. That's why I think queer inclusion in video games is so important, because it can help to normalize queerness so that people could stop thinking it's so harmful, so that the next queer gamer can play a game and feel valid in who they are by seeing and playing characters who identify like them. Do I think queerness will ever be separated from politics? To be honest, no. What I hope for, though, is that there can come a day when seeing a queer character in pop culture, like video games, is normal.